and we'll talk about these exciting things called primary and secondary causes. Maybe it doesn't seem like exciting at the beginning. What I hope, though, is that as we walk through this, it maybe helps us sometimes in that wrestle about, just what we say, how we say it, and so forth. My caveat to this is not a Bible study meant to point out all the ways in which people speak incorrectly, okay? Probably all of us at some point in time had wrestled with exactly what to say as we talk about God's activity when it comes to our day-to-day life, when it comes to how he is working both behind the scenes and then up front. So we're going to dig in a little bit farther today to primary and secondary causes of God's providence. The psalm that's the introductory psalm today, Psalm 127:1. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. So what we're trying to do in our lesson today is come away with the assurance that God is involved in everything that happens, to know that the laws of nature are really God's will in action for the welfare of people, to be comforted with the assurance that God uses a variety of means to provide for us. The previous lesson, we saw that God works in all things, but we don't see him working. It seems as if the world just continues moving along, directed by a group of natural laws and processes. Important question comes to mind. How does God work in all things? The deists believe that God made the world and everything, but then withdrew to let things happen on their own. Probably our most famous deist in our country's history. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson. Others hold to a pantheistic view where all is God and God is all, and therefore whatever you do and whatever happens, really God is at work. That's kind of manifested itself in a movement that probably reached its apex in the 90s. I want to say in our country. What movement would that be? Seems ironic to say it now, the New Age movement.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there was a good deal of pantheism involved in the New Age movement. When you get into Wicca and some of those things as far as religious practice, there's connections there too, that concept of pantheism, that God really is kind of is everything. Not God is at work controlling everything, but God is everything and everything is God. So God is just kind of the glue, the connecting glue that holds all things together. That's maybe a quick sketch look or view at pantheism. How's that going to affect people's attitudes towards life? Let's take the deist one. If you come at life from a deistic standpoint, so understand again what that means, that God got all things organized, set in control, set up natural laws that can't be broken, and then took a step back and said, now I'm just going to watch and let's see what happens. How would that affect the worldview?
There being a law, there would be no faith.
Okay, I'm getting an answer from online that there's, no faith is really involved or necessary. So one of the things is you put Jesus' work sort of over here. Is that hand over there? Okay, sets them in place, you want to change. Interestingly enough, I don't know if a pure deist would buy into evolution unless they would say, well, God used that process to make it happen. But there's where you go, right? That humanity is really in charge then of its own destiny. God set it all up, then gave us a brain, and here's the way all the laws work, and so go at it. Humans, you can achieve and do anything that you want to. Yeah? Mhm. So it's shared there are many variations of what we might call theistic evolution that would suggest God uh, uses those processes to get things created. But just coming at it from that deistic standpoint that there isn't a God who is actively at work keeping things on, just kind of one who started the ball spinning. And I think what you shared is probably the primary manifestation of that. That belief or concept then that man or humankind is in control. While there, I don't think are many pure deists around today, the thinking of philosophy is still very pervasive though. Mm-hmm. How do we see the ideal that humans really are in charge? How do we see that at work right here and now? Yeah.
Global warming, that we need to be careful to avoid this world.
Okay, climate and weather, to the degree that the belief is it really truly is up to humanity, and we can do what's necessary to keep the planet going. Good one. Should Christians be concerned about stewardship of the environment?
Oh,
Not deny that. Christianity isn't a license for, hey, let's go kill all the bison. Okay. It's got some bad effects when you do that, doesn't it? But by the same token, in a way, just think how arrogant it is to think that we have control of things that are, to really think that you're in control of the weather and climate? For all of the measurements of carbon, everything else, and trajectories, what one act can just throw that all out of whack? Only one, it only takes one. One happened in this country in 1981 or 80 or 81. A volcano. A large-scale volcano will have a dramatic in scientific terms, but will have a significant effect on the world's climate. You could put billions and billions and billions of dollars into, you name it, and still one thing like that can have a dramatic effect on the world's climate. I've not heard anyone arrogant enough to say we can stop volcanoes yet, or we can stop earthquakes. I'm kind of waiting for it, but yeah. Go back to the deistic idea in that, yeah, God set things in motion, but we're in control. Who's going to stop the pandemic?
Science. That's what
I heard two ones that you hear a lot. Science.
prayers, lots of them.
Let's start with science. Could somebody please introduce me to him or her? Because the way that term is used, science has done just some absolutely amazing things and will be able to solve every problem that we have. What is it that we've elevated to this, well, science has? What is it? It's people doing what? It's people doing research and coming to what they believe are logical conclusions and doing experiments to see if those conclusions are accurate or not. It's people, yes, doing things that can result in vaccinations and those kinds of things too, but science is not an entity. Science is people, and are they utilizing the things God has put at their disposal, the natural rules and orders and laws of the, sure they are. Has science always successfully solved all of the problems of humankind? Yep, science can be improperly used, and even when it's used to do what we would call good things.
Science is trying to understand God's creation. Science is people trying to understand God's creation.
Yeah, science is really kind of people trying to understand God's creation and do things that maybe can be helpful, but can it solve all the problems?
No, it's just an understanding.
Can you come up with examples of where what was thought at the time to be a wonder of science that was going to do all kinds of good things ended up actually doing more damage than good?
Bloodletting.
Frontal lobotomies.
What was it?
Frontal lobotomies.
Frontal lobotomies.
Yeah.
Bloodletting.
What, John?
Bloodletting, where they put the leeches on.
Bloodletting. Oh, but that wasn't science. But yes, it was at the time. Maybe you get into some famous people. Yeah. Okay, radioactive elements and radium for many years, people thought, what a wonderful, this is just amazing. This is going to help us solve all our problems, until they realized that radiation itself causes all kinds of different problems. Should bring us into the realm of some of those involved in the Manhattan Project were just so conflicted later in life. Einstein's, the Oppenheimers, they were just so conflicted. Is this a good thing that we've done, or is this a bad thing that we've done? So you have so many examples. Even today, when it comes to how about forest management? Have we really figured that one out yet? Okay. Where am I going with all of this? For all of the praise that science gets, remember that it's fallible people really trying to figure out how the creation God has put into place works, and doing some things that maybe have what they would consider a positive effect one way or another. But science does not have this miraculous track record of solving all of the problems. And one of the biggest problems is that still scientific discovery comes up against humanity with all of our flaws and all of the things that go along with it. So I'll play with this a little bit. If we were talking 4 or 5 months ago, conceptually, well, what would a vaccine be? If we found one, we got one. I mean, we'd be back to normal in like a month, right? It's just a matter of and then you start to realize, oh, they aren't all 100% effective. They might have side effects. There will be people that won't get them on purpose. Okay, what you start to realize is this concept that we're just in control of it all. Is that maybe the one thing that God is trying to just nail home? You're not. I guess the final say on when it comes to an end, if it does, is when God is ready. That doesn't mean I'm not saying that scientists shouldn't be at work doing the things they do. I'm not saying that coming up with a vaccine would be a bad thing. But still, ultimately, who is in control of all of that? Pantheism. God is all and in all. How would that affect a person's worldview and therefore their actions? We could almost go to kind of the same category of things. How about we'll call it the natural world and the environment? Those who look at it from a pantheistic viewpoint, that God is all and is in all, how would that affect their view of the natural world. Tom?
And there's no reason to unite and try.
It can be fatalistic. Yeah. Good. In pantheism, again, remember they don't view it as a centralized God or an entity at work. It's kind of the glue. And God is as much a part of me as God is a part of you. Jamie? Okay, now take that to where it leads to actions and worldview. That's okay, you can still go there. That's where I want you to go, Jamie. So, but hold on. That's where you start to bring into play how it affects, for example, a human's attitude towards animals. If God is all and in all, Pastor John?
The cows in India, they worship.
Sure, and now Hindu is a very specific brand that incorporates a lot of pantheism, and there you see it on full display, that you'll have cows walking around while people are starving. But even look again how much we have elevated the natural world, the animal kingdom, and really put it on the same plane then with people.
Just our laws. Yeah.
Because, right, God is everything. God is, and so the concepts, whether the meat is murder slogan or whatever, there is a good deal of pantheism that's expressed in that way, that puts everything then on the same plane, that doesn't understand the relationship between humanity and the created world, where God created it for humanity. Yes? Yeah, God is just, he's there everywhere. And sometimes, it'll be called spiritualism, but there's a good deal of pantheism in much Native American religion. There's a good deal of pantheism in Hindu. That idea that God just is present in everything rather than God is an entity. And then too, the concept, well then, I'm God, and so my purpose is to discover my spirituality or my godness, if you want to call it that, and become more connected with this godness that connects everything together. And when you get into some of the spiritualist kinds of movements, that's very much part of it. I want to feel spiritually connected to the environment. That's where environmentalism can take a religious turn. So, all right. I want to explore that just because if you've got your eyes open, you can see how the attitudes and the things that people say and the things that they do are influenced by kind of a concept or belief that, well, the world just has natural laws and orders and it keeps on going, and our job is to utilize those and maximize those for the benefit of humans the best we can. And then the idea that God is all and in all, and so I don't talk about it very much, but it can actually cause a conflict between science and, I'll call it the fringe environment or the extreme environmental movement. Because at some point in time, in order to do your scientific experiments, you may have to do something that harms the environment. So you see kind of the two sides of things. If you were a true dyed-in-the-wool pantheist, you would not want anything to be done that could harm potentially the environment, because the pristine environment is kind of almost the goal of it all, whereas science, it's improve it to perfection. The environment has still got a long ways to go, and it's our job to help it along. Yes?
Wasn't that part of the problem with, you don't want people to compromise because that compromise might hurt the benefit. So if the compromise down, do not use it because it might hurt.
Sure, a true pantheist would not see any compromise. No, true dyed-in-the-wool would say, well, then, well, think of the depopulation movements. Those that would say the best thing for the earth would be for there to be less people. And so, okay, people die, don't have so many kids. Tom?
I was just thinking, you know, where does half of your body go to, or sometime in the future when that body can be brought back to life? Through science.
That probably goes to more slants towards science. That science will reach the place where they can bring me back. So if I preserve myself for long enough until the technology is there, we'll get there. Myron?
You know, we're opposed to people with, people with conflict and you're, all this talk about animals, you know, say the widows of the testament.
Yeah.
You're the same people that are full of warning.
Sometimes are, but sometimes not. Yeah. Okay. So now, just trying to whet your appetite a little bit, set the stage for why these passages, or how these passages are helpful in navigating this world around us. God works, his creation works. Psalm 127, I read that earlier. We can read it together here. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. What would cause the work of the builders or the watchmen to be in vain? Yeah. Barb?
They're not acknowledging the Lord as the builder.
Okay, not acknowledging God as the builder. Well, what could happen? Yeah. Events beyond their control. We had the most amazing security system that you have ever come up with here at Faith Lutheran Church in our building. 207 cameras feeding into the security system. Can only get in with a fob. All the doors are locked. And someone came and broke into the church and stole thousands of dollars worth of computer equipment and projectors because there was a rainstorm and the lightning hit the transformer and none of those cameras worked. Now I'm making all of that up, but there's an example, wouldn't it be? You can, every precaution possible, and something that simple, event beyond our control. And there it goes. You can have one of the best trained professional basketball teams that's on its way to winning more games in a season than any other team had done before it, and is almost a virtual shoo-in to make it to the NBA championship game. And what can happen? How about a pandemic? Right? Yeah. It happens right in front of us all the time. There's little adages that even secular people have come up with. The best laid plans of mice and men. Why? Why is that true? Because again, something beyond the control of those who make the plans can so easily put all of those plans and make them nothing. Let's take a look at Acts 17, 25 through 28. Let's read. God gives all men life and breath and everything else. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. This is Paul talking to greet people. How only is it possible for people to live, breathe, and exist? Okay, through God. In him we live and move and have our being. He gave all men life and breath and everything else. So if what God is saying in the Bible is true, how does this do away with the notion of either deism or pantheism? How about deism? Yeah.
God is still here working for us, and he's working for us.
Okay, these are present tense verbs. God gives all, it's not one time long ago God gave life and breath. We live and move and have our being. This is a present, in the now thing that's going on, that God is the one behind all of that. We're his children. How about pantheism, that God is in everything? Maybe that one's a little harder to, how do these verses speak against pantheism? Pantheism suggests, yeah, yeah, exactly. That God is separate from the life he creates versus a part and parcel in the glue that just holds it all together. How do these verses help us understand the relationship between God and what we will call secondary causes? All right, before I do that, because we haven't explored that much, watch carefully. Here it is. And again. Ready? Isn't this exciting? How many more times will they fall to the ground if I drop them like that? Every time. Why? Gravity. Oh, what's gravity? It's a force. Oh, well, explain that more to me, okay? Where's Mr. Westfall? Go get him from the other class and bring him here. What's gravity?
Spinning of the earth.
Okay, everybody's got some gravity. What's it based on?
God's laws.
Mass. And so things of greater mass have a greater attractive force on things of, oh, now I understand. Oh, really? Explain that. Why? Why do things of greater mass pull in things of smaller mass? So the earth is bigger, by the way, which is why the keys fall down to the earth. This is a lot bigger than the keys. We can observe all of that, but can you really explain why? Pastor, they're tiny little strings that are actually connected to the keys in the earth. And when the earth is bigger, the strings are a little bit bigger that are connected to the keys and they pull them down.
It's all about the spin.
In a sense, we all know what gravity is, right? But we really have no clue what gravity is. And the smartest scientist on the face of the earth, an academic, can observe it in motion again and again and again and again and again in the natural law, but they cannot explain why. They can't. They can pretend to. Because what is the ultimate reason why? Yeah, God made it that way. We can watch, we can observe with microscopic technology now. I got to be careful with that, because we're kind of in a secondhand way observing that an electron flies around the protons and the neutrons in an atom. Why? Well, it just does. Yeah, it does. We can see that. But why? So when we talk about the natural laws at work and in effect, you start continuing to ask the question why, and you will get to a point where anyone who's honest will have to say either I don't know, or because God made it that way. And it's okay to say both, by the way. When you're saying I don't know, that means no, I don't understand gravity. I can observe it. That doesn't mean I understand it. Except from this standpoint, that God made it that way and is actively keeping that to be the case. If God ceased to exist, then like everything just goes poof. And gravity doesn't work the way God is having it work right now. And electrons don't keep flying around the protons and neutrons. Is that going to be bad news for us? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, primary, yeah.
Just for your example, I Googled what is gravity,
Yep.
and on the NASA site, it says, we don't really know.
Tom says he Googled gravity, and on the NASA site it says we don't really know. And did you ever just really think about that? Something is, well, duh, it's gravity. Okay, oh, you're so smart. Tell me what gravity is. Going back then to primary and secondary causes. Gravity is what we would call a secondary cause. It's something observable at work that we can see. We might call it a natural law, but why does it work that way? Because God made it that way. Who's the primary cause? God. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about primary and secondary causes. Okay? Those are human terms that labels that we slap on what we observe from Scripture, that there is what we might call a natural order. Really, we would call it a God-made order. And we can watch if Christian Yelich hits a baseball and it goes out of the ballpark, why did the ball go out of the ballpark? Because Christian Yelich hit it. Then you could also say, well, gravity was at work or other forces were at work, right? That every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and you can chart it out with physics and everything else like that. But still, those are secondary causes. At the end of the day, who made Christian Yelich and made sure that the atoms in his body work together to form cells, work together to form molecules and systems that make that body work, and the substances that go together to make up the baseball, and so forth. All of those secondary causes, God the primary cause. All right, examples of secondary causes. Not just life within us that enables us to breathe. It's active every time we take a breath. We can say that lungs supply oxygen to the body, so does God. God is the primary cause of our importing oxygen into our bodies, and our lungs are the secondary cause. Let's read that Genesis 1 together. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from night, and let them serve as a sign to mark seasons and days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water and the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. So why does the land produce vegetation? Why do heavenly bodies produce light? Why do fish feel the seas and the birds in the air? Because God made it that way. Now, is it wrong for us to say it? Because in the sun, there are atomic reactions going on with helium and those kinds of things that are perpetual. I think it's fusion, right? The sun is fusion. Yeah. Perpetual fusion reactions that radiate heat off of the sun. It's not incorrect to say that. But why do those reactions and things function the way that they do? Because there's someone who made it that way and continues to be in control to keep those systems intact so that they do function that way. God, the primary cause. Tom.
I think it's so amazing that a farmer puts a seed of corn in the ground, and in a few months, it's a whole stalk of all kinds of corn enrolls, and with that soil and the sunlight that is already there to produce that corn.
Yeah. Tom, I agree with you. Tom shared, it's just so amazing to me that from a little seed of corn you put it in the ground, and weeks later, months later, you got the whole plant and everything else that's there. And I'll echo what you're saying this way. Have we gotten to the point where we cease to be amazed, where we should be amazed? You know, how many of us do really plant seeds in the ground anymore and watch them grow up and so forth? And I'm not saying, oh, for the days when everyone was a farmer. A lot of reasons I probably wouldn't want to be a farmer too. But to be amazed by that, I mean, for all of us here that have had a child, isn't that just one of the most amazing moments in life? Be amazed. And I want to fast forward to kind of one of my biggest takeaways as we look at primary and secondary causes. It's not that we know all the terminology. Well, what attitude of the heart should that leave us with? I'm still going to leave that as a little teaser. Make sure I don't forget to say it at the end. Okay. What are we trying to go away with as we look at that? But yeah, I think sometimes we can cease to be amazed at just how incredible it is that all of these systems work together the way they are. And what so makes me want, I referenced this last week too, it so makes me want to bang my head against the wall and go, ah, science and adaptation have great. But what does it mean? Nature has. Tell me what this nature is that does all these amazing things and makes it that way. All you're doing is observing, and yet you have come to the conclusion that there's, by the way you talk, you're giving away that still deep down you recognize there's something that drives all of this. You can call it nature if you want. But nature is just the observable world in scientific terms. It's not a force at work. But every documentary uses the term that way as if it's a force that's at work. Genesis 8:22. As long as the earth endures, seed time, harvest, cold, heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease, says God. And what's the context? Remember this? What's the context? When are these words spoken? What is? Yeah.
After the flood.
Yeah, and from our online too. After the flood, God's promise to Noah, who experienced the worst environmental disaster that the world has ever seen.
That's really nice.
God says, I'm not going to do this again. So, for the climate alarmists, the population alarmists, and all of those, I shrug my shoulders. I grant we are stewards of God's environment, and that's an important thing. But to be obsessed and just worry and worry and worry, the world will be absolutely wrecked for our kids, and we will bring it to a horrific end. God is going to end the world at his time and his choosing. And until then, he's promised me. I've got his specific word on this. Seed time and harvest, summer and winter, those things aren't going to cease. No, an asteroid is not going to come in close contact with the earth, hit it, throw it off its axis, and throw us into polar winter that's going to kill everything. We can write science fiction movies about that if we want to, fine, go ahead. But my God has promised me that that's not going to happen. Huh?
We see a man as we can do something about that. What are you going to do? Stop all air quality? Stop life? God is still come back home. God is still
Yeah, no, God's still in control. And I always, yeah, I always want to be clear that Christians, faithful Christians can and will have disagreements in regard to what should and shouldn't be done with the environment. And that's okay. But what we don't want to get into is one where we must do X, Y, and Z with the environment because we are the ones that control its destiny. That's where you're getting yourself into trouble. You know, you look and you say, when I was in grade school, the big thing was acid rain, and there was a very genuine connection between the pollution that came out of coal plants and the rain that was falling and killing a lot of the trees on the eastern seaboard. And when they put scrubbers in the coal plants, lo and behold, it made a huge difference. Hey, I'm good with that. That's why I just want to make sure people understand you can be a Christian and be someone who is working to help, if you want to put it that, the environment. But where we don't want to go is the place where we're thinking we are in control of it and therefore must do X, Y, and Z. Yes? Mm. Yeah. Yeah, and the hardest thing when you're talking anything global, when you're doing an experiment in a room, you can control all the variables. Just think how many variables there are in anything that's, and we're seeing that too as you try to figure out, well, what helps the most as far as stopping spread. Is it best to stop spread? We don't know. And there are, thousands of variables. Thousands of variables. Genesis 1:29-30. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit and seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. Why is it incorrect to say that it naturally happens that hunger is satisfied and bodies are nourished and food is eaten? Or maybe I put how is it incorrect? Because again, the point in this is not to go away and say, you spoke wrong when you said that naturally there's food on the table. What is the point here again? Who is in control of the production of food? Making it what Tom observes with the corn plant. Why does it work that way? God. Yeah. Psalm 145, 14, 15. The Lord upholds all those who fall, lifts up all who are bowed down. The eyes of all look to you. You give them their food at the proper time. Why wouldn't you say nature takes care of its creatures? Yeah. Okay, God is the one that's going to take care of creatures. Again, if you talk that way, well, what is nature? Things, laws. So the laws take care of their creatures?
Lions eat gazelles.
No, it's God that's in control. And yes, there are natural observable things, a food chain as an example, but God is in control of them all. If we disagree, instead of using the expression the laws of nature, we ought to speak about God's will in action for the welfare of his creatures. Doesn't it depend on context? I think we can use the terminology, the laws of nature, if we would like to do that. If we're talking about, for example, Newtonian laws or whatever you might say, that this is what's observable in every situation. The keys always fall on the ground. Could I call that the law of gravity? Yes. But would I say, well, it's gravity that made that happen? That's maybe where I would say, no, God makes that happen. Gravity is the term I slap on this observable phenomenon. Now, when I drop the keys, they hit the floor. But God is the one that's in control of the observable phenomenon. 2 Samuel 17. Absalom and all the men of Israel said, the advice of Hushai the Archite was better than that of Ahithophel, for the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of Ahithophel in order to bring disaster on Absalom. So Absalom was pursuing his father David with the intent of killing him, and Hushai and Ahithophel offered Absalom advice. Hushai was David's side and offered bad advice designed at giving David some time to regroup. Ahithophel gave good advice, encouraging Absalom to strike quickly while David was tired. What secondary means did the Lord use to protect David from Absalom?
Sweet.
Yeah. In this case, God actually used bad advice. God used bad advice to make happen what he wanted to happen. Does that ever happen still today? Sure. And as much as we might not like to say it, maybe he's used some of our own bad advice sometimes in a way where he circled it back and actually used it for good. That doesn't mean, oh, well, if God can use bad advice for good, then I don't have to worry about what kind of advice I can give. No, that's not where we're going with this. But maybe it helps us from just being panicked and overwhelmed when we see in the world people doing things that God doesn't approve of, giving advice that is absolutely contradictory to the Bible, and not walking away just completely dejected and discouraged. So many times in Bible history and world history, God has turned those actions into something we never could have dreamed. So that balance, that tightrope between just going in a corner and hiding, which God doesn't want us to do, but by the same token, not falling into that absolute despair where, oh, things just, I give up. No. God, the primary cause, is still at work. Still at work. Yes.
This question probably goes to the last one, but I was thinking, when you say laws of nature and you say like Mother Earth, that's something the same, or is that different?
Yeah, I think it is. The question was, you hear terms like Mother Nature or the laws of nature, Mother Nature. It's just kind of a giveaway that as much as people don't want to acknowledge that there's a driving force, a controlling force behind it, it's as if, well, we'll come up with, we're never going to call it God. How about Mother Nature? That sounds so. You haven't defined anything. You've actually created a term that has no meaning other than to imply there's a controlling force. Otherwise, why do you even see a reason to use the term? And now, honestly, a lot of times they don't. Maybe somebody called them on it, and so you see things like that imply, well, the shark adapted. Last week someone said, man, I'm a teacher. I wish I had a third hand. How come I can't just grow one? The creatures aren't in control of that either. Tom.
Something I
Hebrew. Hebrew's a little tricky there. The breath of life, the life force that's there. It very clearly is a term that's used for human and animal life as opposed to the plants of the field. You know, those that have the breath of life. Scientifically, we use the term a little bit different now. Life is everything that has living cells that are observable and reproduce and so forth. So we would call a plant, we talk about plant life and even fungi and as opposed to minerals. The way they described it wasn't quite as nuanced, and it was the breath of life is one that's kind of the determining or the differentiating term that's used there. And then you get into other terms that are used that present a person with soul. But unlike English, that has just one word for it, usually is more of an expression than it is a single word in Hebrew. Clear as mud? I'm trying to think how I can maybe answer your question better, Tom. Is the root of your question that in the Bible, you can, say it to me one more time and let me make sure I'm hearing what the question is.
Well, God breathed the life in the air.
Yeah.
That time on, all life comes from that one breath.
Yes.
It's passed down to our children.
And yet God says, I give everyone the breath of life when they're born. That God even talks about being active for each and every one of us personally, making that happen. Okay. Maybe your question was simpler than I made it. Hebrews 1:14. Are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? What's the angel's job? Okay, to serve. Who's going to inherit salvation? Believers. Those who serve the angels, or who serve the believers. Romans 13:4. For he is God's servant to do you good, but if you do wrong, be afraid. He does not bear the sword for nothing. God's servant, agent of wrath, bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So the servant in this case is government. All right? Secondary cause. Psalm 68. Speaks of God using the means, again, of government and family to accomplish his purposes. Just scanning these over because I want to get to the one thing I said I wanted to get up here. How about that second bullet point? Agree, disagree. If God intends for a person to be healthy, it will happen regardless of what that person does. Okay, again, understand primary and secondary causes don't mean that God has every detail of our life planned and charted out. And God also does want us and tell us to take care of our bodies, so we do that. Yes? Yeah, that does happen. Yeah. So the flip side of it that says, if you think, well, if I eat all the right foods and diet and exercise and get all my cholesterol levels down and don't have diabetes, now everything's good. And now I'm going to live till 102. You hear God snickering? Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That's the flip side of that. We want to be stewards of our body, but not to the end that we think the end goal is to live a long life here, and that's going to accomplish it still in God's hands. Yeah. All right. I said the point I really want to make before I finish, when we look at primary and secondary causes, is an attitude of humility and awe towards God, rather than an attitude of, I must control and I must be in control. An attitude of awe and humility. You know, when you go on the NASA website and you see that as the definition for gravity, that we really don't know what it is, shouldn't something click up here that says, whoa, it's pretty amazing all of the things that we do know and that we can observe. But aren't they really telling us what a wonderful being has come up with all of that? Which just ties right in with the way that the Bible describes God. That is the point I wanted to leave with. Not that, well, I know all the correct ways to phrase things now, but no, that our attitude as we go through life is one of humility and awe at the primary cause. We'll close with prayer, and before I do that, in our teardown today, Pastor Hugley is here. There are a few things we're going to put in a different place, to the couple of like 4 tables or so forth that we're going to move to a little bit different place. So if you could follow directive from Pastor Hugley, that'd be appreciated. Let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for this time together. Again, we ask that you would bless us as we go forward into this week. Keep us safe, keep us strong. Help us with humility and awe to appreciate how you are the primary cause of who we are and what we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
If we could have help, we're setting chairs or tables up outside the preschool playground area. We're going to need 5